the happiness talk continues with the, let's say, some of the deeper stuff, the more difficult to achieve types of things, but oh, so important. So, for example, having a sense of meaning and purpose in life is huge. Now, as I've been doing this work, about 20 years now, one of the things that I've asked people so many times, especially people who are spiritually minded, is, do you think that the people have a purpose? Do you think that you have a purpose? And lots of times people will say, yeah, and I'll ask, okay, so what have you been doing to try to figure out what that purpose is? I mean, what is more important than a person's purpose? And mostly people have spent zero amount of time exploring this idea and their purpose, which, when you think about it, if it's one of the most important things or the most important thing in your life, well, why wouldn't you spend some time trying to figure out what it is? One of the reasons is people kind of scratch their head about, well, what do I do? And so a couple of ideas is, well, there's this thing called the computer. You Google trying to find your purpose, do that work. If you are spiritually minded and you do think that you have a purpose, well, one good idea is to try to meditate and get out of your own way and kind of put the question out there to the universe, God, whatever it is, to see if there is a purpose for you. Seek and ye shall find if you want to, and at least it's doing something, even if it doesn't show up, and it probably won't show up immediately. It didn't for me, but it did eventually, and I know for sure that I've been living on purpose, on my purpose, and that only because I learned to get out of my own way and ask for the guidance, which came in multiple different ways, which has guided me right along, and it's been glorious. I'd recommend it to anybody. I will spare you the stories perhaps for another time, but downright miraculous. I've shared them plenty of times. The chances of me ending up as a drug and alcohol counselor and a therapist pretty darn remote when considering some of the circumstances, not just the history that I've shared, but I mean just real briefly, when the messages first started coming, I was in Podunk, South Texas, good 30 miles away from the nearest school, and hadn't been in school for, over a decade, whatever it was. I was a high school dropout. When the message starts coming, I should be a drug and alcohol counselor, but I'm 30 miles away from the closest school, not matriculated, no job, no gas money, living off of the charity of my sister, my mother. Yeah, what are the odds of that happening? Well, it did, and then on it goes. Do seek your purpose. If it isn't in your work, perhaps it's in some kind of a other thing, hobby, or being a parent, or whatever it is that you feel is your purpose, meaning, makes life meaningful, worthwhile, makes you happy. A good thing to remember is this idea that we are what we consume. The saying, you are what you eat, but it's also not just what you eat, putting into your mouth, but it's what you put into your mind, it's what you put into your ears. And so this is worthwhile to remember that, what you consume becomes who you are to some degree. And if you are listening to, negative people, or, consuming violence on television or in other ways, that becomes part of your wiring. And so it's something to remember. I mean, I was loving hard driving rock and roll, and I just decided at the point of making the changes that I needed to listen to much more soothing types of music. And there's a ton of research that shows that this does have an effect. I'm not saying that people that listen to rock and roll are going to go out and kill people or anything like that. I'm saying if you do a deep dive on the research, you will see that people who consume more relaxing, soothing music are more relaxed human beings. Then I've talked before about the value of a certain type of exercise. Any exercise is good for you. However, if you take the resting heart rate and whatever those beats per minute are, and you raise that by increment of somewhere between 60 and 80%, and I say somewhere between because there's a ton of research on this. Some has shown as low as 60%, but most around the 80% rise in beats per minute. You keep that sustained for at least 20 minutes. After the 20-minute mark, endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine get released from the vesicles in the brain more rapidly. Now, the thing about this is that we are not just after the fix for that day. There's a thing called neuroplasticity. The brain changes form and function over time. When you constantly put more endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine into your noggin, then you are going to be happier over time, regardless of whether you are exercising or not, because now your brain has changed form and function. The way to think about this is like the opposite of, let's say, an addict or an alcoholic. If a guy goes to get drunk a couple of times, that's not going to change much. If he goes to get drunk 4 times a week for the next 2 years, that's going to change him, and he'll probably be dependent on alcohol. So this is like the opposite of that. You just continue to pump good neurochemicals into your brain. Your brain will change form and function so that you're just happy in general. Learning to do gratitude meditations. Again, this creates new neural wiring in our brain to where we start to see the world from the lens of all of the things that we have to be grateful for. And if you do 10 minutes of gratitude meditation, a couple of times a week, yeah, you probably cover the same old territory of, okay, if I got my health, if I got a job, I got kids, wife, whatever it is. But if you do it daily and you run out of those, common types of things that you think about, then you start getting creative and you start getting grateful for washing machines, and you don't have to go down to the lake and pound rocks and get grateful for indoor plumbing, and you don't have to go out and freeze when you go to the bathroom. The world is full of miracles. We inherited this wonderful, wonderful place that's just full of all of these wonderful things. And instead of being grateful that we have this miracle network of traffic, roads and all that, we get pissed off when we're stuck in traffic instead of looking at the bazillions of dollars and man hours that went into creating these wonderful roadways that we have that let us get around. Now, I've been doing this for 20 years now. It's just almost automatic that I see things through this lens of gratitude. Okay. And it goes to also mindfulness, being aware of our awareness, being mindful of what we're thinking and why we're thinking it, and challenging our thoughts. And this goes back to some of the ABC stuff that I was talking about. Living in the moment, learning that, for example, there's no such thing as the future, because the future never gets here, and the past is always gone. So all we really ever have is a perpetual now. And if we can really try to access that as much as possible, it lends itself to a place of happiness because we aren't dwelling on the future or worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. We're just in the moment. And that doesn't mean that we don't set goals. It doesn't mean that we don't concern ourselves with things that we might have some control over. We just learn to detach from these things as much as possible, and this will unburden us, and make us happier. So these as some strategies. Oh, by the way, a great book that would help anybody with that effort of living in the moment, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. He's written a few good books, that guy. A New Earth, it's called A New Earth, another good one. And that's it too. Like earlier I was saying, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being or improvement. To my mind, the mental health, once we're past any deficits, right? So we're back into the positive psychology end of things to say, well, what can I learn to help improve my life? More information is always better than less information. You can always reject whatever it is that you are learning, deciding that it's not worth your while or time or effort or whatever. But having it and not using it is a whole lot better than not having it to access. So my recommendation, learn as much as possible. Again, the brain is very much like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it's going to get, and the less susceptible to disease and nonsense and illness. Covered that. But I think that. Well, I know for sure I could just go on with examples about what a person can do, but one of the things that I've always done in my work as a therapist is put people on the job, meaning to say, listen, if you want this, then it's on you to go figure out, I'm pointing the way. The information is there and available to you. If you want it, go get it. And my recommendation is that you think about this, that you deserve it. Take that under consideration. You deserve to be happy.